On April 23, 1976, 41-year-old Thomas William Elliott disappeared from Missoula, Montana. His 1974 Chevrolet Nova was discovered at 7:23 a.m. the following morning in the parking area of Rattlesnake Wilderness Recreation Area, approximately 12 miles north of the city. Keys remained in the ignition. The driver's door stood open. Investigators from the Missoula County Sheriff's Office found blood evidence on the driver's seat and steering wheel. Case number 76-1847 went cold on August 15, 1976, after a 114-day investigation yielded no viable suspects. In September 2023, 47 years after the crime, cold case detective David Conner reopened the investigation using forensic genetic genealogy. DNA extracted from blood evidence produced a match to someone who had actively participated in search operations in 1976. What investigators would discover about this individual's connection to the victim would fundamentally alter the community's understanding of the case. This case represents a breakthrough in forensic genealogy and demonstrates how justice, though delayed nearly 5 decades, finally arrived through scientific advancement and investigative persistence. Subscribe to our channel to stay updated on cold case investigations. Hit the notification bell to be alerted when we release new episodes featuring unsolved mysteries brought to justice. On September 18, 2023, Detective David Conner, a 22-year veteran of the Missoula County Sheriff's Office and head of the cold case unit since 2019, retrieved cardboard box number 412 from the cold case archive located in the basement of the county courthouse at 200 West Broadway Street. I was looking for cases with biological evidence collected before the DNA era, Detective Conner told our team in an interview conducted in October 2023. The Elliott case stood out because there were 3 separate blood samples collected at the scene and properly preserved. Conner specializes in applying forensic genetic genealogy to unsolved cases. In 4 years with the cold case unit, he has solved 6 homicides that occurred between 1972 and 1995. His most notable success was the 2021 resolution of the Sarah Johnson case, a 19-year-old college student murdered in 1984, solved through genetic genealogy after 37 years. The Elliott file contained 247 pages of reports, witness statements, and evidence logs. According to the evidence inventory dated April 24, 1976, the Montana State Crime Laboratory in Helena had preserved 3 blood samples collected from Elliott's vehicle. These samples had been stored at 4 degrees Celsius in the evidence facility since 1976. The preservation was exceptional, Conner noted in his initial case review memo, dated September 18, 2023. The chain of custody was intact. The samples were viable for modern DNA analysis. This case could be solved. On September 22, 2023, Conner formally requested the Montana State Crime Laboratory to conduct STR-DNA analysis on the preserved blood samples. The request was assigned case number 2023 ML8847. Dr. Patricia Mendez, the lab's forensic DNA specialist with 18 years of experience, would lead the analysis. When Detective Conner brought this case to us, I was immediately interested, Dr. Mendez said in a phone interview conducted in November 2023. Cases from the 1970s present unique challenges, but this evidence had been stored under ideal conditions. I was confident we could extract DNA profiles. Thomas Elliott's last day began at 6:15 a.m. on April 23, 1976, according to his wife's statement given to investigators on April 25, 1976. At 6:15 a.m. on April 23, 1976, Thomas Elliott woke at his residence at 1847 Poplar Street in Missoula. His wife, Margaret Elliott, prepared breakfast. According to her statement, Thomas appeared normal, in good spirits, looking forward to the weekend. At 7:30 a.m., Elliott departed for work in his 1974 Chevrolet Nova, license plate MT478821. He worked as the head pharmacist at Missoula Community Medical Center. located at 2827 Fort Missoula Road, a position he had held for 11 years. At 7:52 a.m., security guard Robert Hutchins logged Elliott's arrival at the hospital parking lot. Mr. Elliott was always punctual, Hutchins told investigators in his April 24, 1976 statement. He parked in his regular spot, space E47, waved to me like he always did. Between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m., Elliott worked his standard shift in the hospital pharmacy. According to hospital records, he processed 127 prescriptions that day. Pharmacy technician Linda Parsons, who worked alongside Elliott, told investigators that April 23rd was a completely normal day. Tom was in good spirits. We talked about his plans to go fishing that weekend. At 5:08 p.m., Elliott clocked out using the hospital's time card system. His time card, preserved in evidence, shows the punch time of 17:08. At 5:15 p.m., hospital employee James Morrison reported seeing Elliott's Chevrolet Nova leaving the parking lot, heading north on Fort Missoula Road. At 5:45 p.m., Margaret Elliott expected her husband home. He did not arrive. At 6:30 p.m., Margaret called the hospital. The night supervisor confirmed Thomas had left at his normal time. At 7:45 p.m., Margaret Elliott called the Missoula County Sheriff's Office to report her husband missing. Deputy Frank Walsh took the call and generated missing person report 76 MP 441. At 8:30 p.m., deputies began checking the route between the hospital and the Elliott residence. No sign of the vehicle was found. On April 24, 1976, at 6:47 a.m., Montana Highway Patrol Trooper Kevin O'Brien discovered Elliott's abandoned 1974 Chevrolet Nova in the parking area of Rattlesnake Wilderness Recreation Area during a routine patrol. The vehicle was parked in the northeast corner of the lot, approximately 400 feet from the trailhead entrance. According to Trooper O'Brien's incident report filed at 7:15 a.m. on April 24, 1976, the vehicle's condition immediately raised concerns. The driver's side door was open. Keys remained in the ignition, turned to the off position. The headlights were off. I approached the vehicle cautiously, O'Brien wrote in his report. I could see what appeared to be blood on the driver's seat. I immediately called for backup and secured the scene. Missoula County Sheriff's Detective James Reynolds arrived at 7:38 a.m. Reynolds, a 15-year veteran with the department, had investigated 47 homicides during his career. He immediately recognized the scene as a potential crime. The blood pattern on the seat indicated significant trauma, Reynolds noted in his preliminary scene assessment dated April 24, 1976. The door was open, suggesting the victim either exited or was removed from the vehicle. There were no signs of struggle outside the vehicle, which suggested the attack occurred while the victim was seated in the car. Crime scene technician Donald Martinez arrived at 8:15 a.m. with the evidence collection kit. According to his report, he collected 3 blood samples from the vehicle. Sample A was blood from the driver's seat cushion, collected at 8:32 a.m. Sample B was blood from the steering wheel, collected at 8:47 a.m. Sample C was blood from the driver's side door panel, collected at 9:03 a.m. Martinez also collected fingerprints from the door handle, steering wheel, and rear view mirror. He photographed the scene from 27 different angles. His report notes, blood appeared fresh, less than 12 hours old based on color and consistency. The vehicle was transported to the Sheriff's Office evidence facility at 10:15 a.m., where it underwent detailed forensic examination over the following 3 days. Thomas William Elliott was born on March 12, 1935, in Butte, Montana. His birth certificate, obtained from Silver Bow County records, lists his parents as William James Elliott and Dorothy May Elliott. According to academic records from the University of Montana, Elliott graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy in June 1958. His transcript shows a 3.4 GPA. He completed his pharmacy internship at St. Patrick Hospital in Missoula from September 1958 to August 1959. Elliott obtained his Montana pharmacy license, number PH2847, in September 1959. He worked at Johnson's Pharmacy on Higgins Avenue from 1959 to 1965 before accepting the position as head pharmacist at Missoula Community Medical Center in January 1965. Thomas was one of the most dedicated pharmacists I've worked with. Dr. Robert Crawford, medical director of Missoula Community Medical Center, told investigators in an April 26, 1976 interview. In 11 years, he missed only 3 days of work. Patients trusted him completely. He knew hundreds of patients by name. Elliott's personnel file, reviewed by our team with permission from hospital administrators, contains 11 years of performance reviews. Every review rated him excellent or outstanding in all categories. A March 1976 review, written just 1 month before his disappearance, noted, "Mr. Elliott continues to demonstrate exceptional pharmaceutical knowledge and patient care. He has trained 3 pharmacy technicians who have gone on to successful careers. He is an invaluable member of our medical team." Elliott married Margaret Ann Chambers on June 15, 1960, at St. Francis Xavier Church in Missoula. According to the marriage certificate filed with Missoula County, Margaret was 22 years old, working as a school teacher at Hellgate Elementary School. Thomas was 25. The couple had 2 children. Jennifer Lynn Elliott was born on April 3, 1961. Michael Thomas Elliott was born on September 18, 1964. Both were living at home at the time of their father's disappearance. Jennifer was 15 years old, a sophomore at Hellgate High School. Michael was 11, in 6th grade at Rattlesnake Elementary School. "Dad was the most reliable person I knew," Jennifer Elliott told our team in a November 2023 interview, 47 years after her father's disappearance. "He was home for dinner every night at 6 p.m. He coached Michael's Little League team. He helped me with my homework. The idea that he would just not come home was incomprehensible." Neighbors described Elliott as quiet, friendly, and deeply involved in his family. Robert Anderson, who lived next door to the Elliotts at 1845 Poplar Street from 1968 to 1982, told investigators in April 1976, "Tom was the guy who helped everyone. If your car broke down, Tom would come over with his tools. If you needed to borrow something, Tom had it. He was just a good man." Elliott's hobbies, according to family interviews, included fly fishing, woodworking, and reading. His library card from the Missoula Public Library shows he checked out 127 books between January 1975 and April 1976, primarily non-fiction works about Montana history and fishing techniques. Detective James Reynolds led the investigation. According to his case summary dated April 24, 1976, he immediately established several investigative priorities. First, determine if Elliott arrived at Rattlesnake Recreation Area voluntarily or was transported there. Second, identify witnesses who may have seen Elliott or his vehicle between 5:15 p.m. on April 23 and 6:47 a.m. on April 24. Third, investigate Elliott's personal and professional relationships for potential motives. Fourth, search the Rattlesnake Wilderness area for Elliott's body or additional evidence. Between April 24 and 26, 1976, a search team of 47 volunteers, coordinated by the Missoula County Sheriff's Search and Rescue Unit, conducted an extensive search of the Rattlesnake Wilderness area. According to the search operation log, teams covered approximately 8 square miles over 3 days. Search and Rescue Coordinator Thomas Brennan reported on April 27, 1976. "We searched every trail, every creek bed, every accessible area within a 3-mile radius of where the vehicle was found. We found no sign of Mr. Elliott, no clothing, no evidence of any kind. Between April 24 and 30, 1976, Reynolds and his team conducted 34 interviews with hospital staff, neighbors, family members, and known associates of Elliott. According to the interview log preserved in case files, every person described Elliott as reliable, honest, and family-oriented. We found no evidence of marital problems, financial difficulties, substance abuse, or anything that would suggest why someone would want to harm Thomas Elliott, Reynolds wrote in his case summary, dated May 1, 1976. Every person we interviewed expressed shock and disbelief. This was a man without apparent enemies. Between May 1 and 15, 1976, investigators examined Elliott's financial records with family permission. Bank statements from First Interstate Bank showed regular deposits and withdrawals consistent with his salary. There were no unusual transactions, no large withdrawals, no evidence of financial distress. The Elliott family finances were stable, Detective Reynolds noted. Combined household income was approximately $32,000 annually. They had $8,400 in savings. Their mortgage payments were current. There was no apparent financial motive for either suicide or foul play involving money. Between May 16 and 31, 1976, the investigation expanded to examine Elliott's professional life. Hospital administrators granted access to pharmacy records. Dr. Crawford told investigators, "We conducted an internal audit of all controlled substances. Every pill was accounted for. Thomas's records were impeccable." Montana State Board of Pharmacy reviewed Elliott's licensing and found no complaints, no disciplinary actions, no irregularities. Board President Frank Morrison wrote in a May 28, 1976 letter to Detective Reynolds, "Mr. Elliott's record is spotless. In 17 years of practice, he has never had a complaint filed against him." The blood samples collected from Elliott's vehicle were sent to the Montana State Crime Laboratory on April 26, 1976. In 1976, DNA analysis did not exist. The laboratory could only perform blood typing. According to the forensic report dated May 18, 1976, forensic scientist Dr. Harold Peterson determined that all 3 samples were human blood. All 3 samples were type O positive, and the samples were consistent with Thomas Elliott's known blood type, documented in his medical records at Missoula Community Medical Center. The blood is consistent with the victim's, but that doesn't definitively prove it's his blood, Dr. Peterson wrote in his report. Type O positive is the most common blood type, occurring in approximately 38% of the population. Without more advanced testing, we cannot make a definitive identification. The fingerprints collected from the vehicle were analyzed by the Montana Department of Justice's Crime Laboratory. According to the report dated May 22, 1976, all fingerprints belonged to Thomas Elliott, with the exception of 3 partial prints on the passenger door handle that were too degraded for identification. As weeks passed without locating Elliott's body or identifying suspects, investigators developed several working theories. Detective Reynolds documented these in his June 15, 1976 progress report. The first theory was random abduction. Elliott may have been abducted by an unknown assailant while stopped at Rattlesnake Recreation Area. However, this theory raised questions. Why would Elliott drive to a remote location after work when he was expected home? No witnesses reported seeing him at the recreation area. The second theory was suicide. Elliott may have driven to the remote location intending to commit suicide, then walked into the wilderness. However, this theory contradicted everything known about Elliott's character and circumstances. He showed no signs of depression, had a stable family life, and his financial and professional situations were sound. The blood evidence suggested trauma, not consistent with walking away from the vehicle. The third theory was targeted violence. Someone may have forced Elliott to drive to the remote location attacked him in the vehicle, and removed his body. This theory aligned with the physical evidence, but provided no leads regarding who might have wanted to harm Elliott or why. The frustrating aspect of this case is that we have clear evidence of violence, but no apparent motive, no witnesses, and no body, Reynolds wrote in his June 30, 1976 case review. Thomas Elliott lived a transparent life. We've examined every aspect of his existence and found no enemies, no secrets, no explanations. The disappearance of Thomas Elliott shocked the Missoula community. According to articles preserved in the Missoulian newspaper archives, the case received extensive local coverage. A front-page article dated April 26, 1976, with the headline, "Local Pharmacist Missing After Car Found in Rattlesnake Area," reported, Thomas Elliott, 41, a well-known Missoula pharmacist, has been missing since Friday evening. His vehicle was discovered Saturday morning with signs of violence. Sheriff's deputies are asking anyone with information to come forward. The Missoula Community Medical Center offered a $5,000 reward for information leading to the resolution of the case. According to hospital records, this announcement generated 47 phone calls to the sheriff's office tip line between April 28 and May 15, 1976. Detective Reynolds followed up on each tip. None yielded useful information. St. Francis Xavier Church, where the Elliott family were parishioners, held a prayer vigil on May 2, 1976. According to church records, more than 200 people attended. The community rallied around Margaret and the children, said Father Michael O'Connor, who served as pastor of St. Francis Xavier from 1972 to 1985 in a 2023 interview with our team. Everyone knew Tom Elliott. Everyone trusted him with their prescriptions, their health concerns. People couldn't comprehend how someone like Tom could just vanish. By August 1976, the investigation had exhausted all viable leads. Detective Reynolds had interviewed 127 people, followed up on 89 tips, and searched more than 15 square miles of wilderness. Thomas Elliott's body had not been found. No suspects had been identified. No credible theories explained his disappearance. On August 15, 1976, Detective Reynolds submitted his final report. The document, 73 pages long, concluded, "Despite extensive investigation, this case remains unsolved. The evidence suggests Thomas William Elliott was the victim of violence, but without a body, without witnesses, and without suspects, this investigation has reached an impasse. The case file will be transferred to cold case storage pending new information." Case 76-1847 was boxed, assigned storage number 412, and placed in the cold case archive in the basement of the Missoula County Courthouse. It would remain there, untouched, for 47 years. I never forgot that case. James Reynolds, now 84 years old and retired in Helena, told our team in a phone interview conducted in October 2023. Tom Elliott was a good man who deserved justice. I worked that case as hard as I could with the tools available in 1976. I always hoped that someday, somehow, it would be solved. I just never imagined it would take 47 years. The technology that would eventually solve Thomas Elliott's case didn't exist in 1976. DNA was first used in a criminal investigation in 1986. The FBI's Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, wasn't established until 1998. Forensic genetic genealogy, the technique that would crack the Elliott case, wasn't used to solve a crime until 2018. We're living in a golden age of cold case investigation, Detective David Connor explained in our October 2023 interview. Cases that were unsolvable 20 years ago are now solvable because of advances in DNA technology and the growth of genetic genealogy databases. Forensic genetic genealogy combines traditional DNA analysis with genealogical research. Instead of just searching law enforcement databases for direct DNA matches, investigators can upload DNA profiles to public genealogy databases. When the DNA matches distant relatives, third cousins, fourth cousins, investigators use family trees to identify potential suspects. This technique gained national attention in April 2018 when it was used to identify Joseph James DeAngelo as the Golden State Killer, a serial rapist and murderer who had evaded capture for more than 40 years. The Golden State Killer case changed everything, said Dr. Patricia Mendez of the Montana State Crime Laboratory. It showed us that cases we thought were impossible to solve could be solved with this new approach. On September 25, 2023, Dr. Mendez began the DNA extraction process on the blood samples from Thomas Elliott's vehicle. According to her laboratory notes, the process presented unique challenges. Blood samples from 1976 are degraded, Dr. Mendez explained. DNA breaks down over time, but these samples had been stored under ideal conditions, cool, dry, sealed properly. I was able to extract sufficient DNA from sample A and sample B for analysis. The extraction process took 3 days. Dr. Mendez used a technique called STR analysis, short tandem repeat analysis, which examines specific locations on chromosomes where DNA sequences repeat. These repetitions are unique to each individual, creating a DNA profile that can identify a person with extraordinary accuracy. On October 2, 2023, Dr. Mendez completed the DNA analysis and generated 2 profiles. Profile 1 was DNA from sample A, the driver's seat blood, consistent with Thomas Elliott based on reference DNA from his stored medical records. Profile 2 was DNA from sample B, the steering wheel blood, belonging to an unknown individual. This DNA did not match Thomas Elliott. That second profile was the breakthrough, Detective Connor said. We knew we had the killer's DNA. Now we had to identify who it belonged to. On October 5, 2023, Detective Connor submitted the unknown DNA profile to CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database. CODIS contains DNA profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees, and forensic evidence from crime scenes across all 50 states. The system searches automatically, comparing the submitted profile against millions of profiles in the database. On October 6, 2023, at 2:37 p.m., CODIS returned its results. No direct match. A negative CODIS result doesn't mean the case is unsolvable, Connor explained. It just means the person's DNA isn't in the law enforcement database. That's where genetic genealogy comes in. On October 9, 2023, with approval from Missoula County Attorney Jennifer Hayes, Detective Connor uploaded the unknown DNA profile to GEDmatch, a public genetic genealogy database. Unlike CODIS, which only contains profiles from people involved in the criminal justice system, GEDmatch contains DNA from millions of people who voluntarily uploaded their DNA data from commercial ancestry tests. The upload generated several matches, distant cousins who shared small amounts of DNA with the unknown profile. None of the matches were close enough for immediate identification, but they provided a starting point. Genetic genealogy is like building a puzzle, Connor explained. You start with distant cousins, build family trees for each match, and look for common ancestors. Then you work forward through generations to identify descendants who would be the right age and location to be your suspect. Connor contacted Parabon Nanolabs, a company that specializes in forensic genetic genealogy. On October 12, 2023, genetic genealogist Dr. Ellen Morrison began working on the case. According to Dr. Morrison's case report dated November 3, 2023, the genetic genealogy investigation proceeded through several phases. In Phase 1, identifying common ancestors, Dr. Morrison identified 4 GED match profiles that were third and fourth cousins to the unknown DNA profile. Using birth records, marriage certificates, census data, and obituaries, she built family trees for each match. The trees converged on a common ancestor, Robert and Martha Callahan, who lived in Butte, Montana, in the late 1800s. In Phase 2, building the descendant tree, Robert and Martha Callahan had 6 children. Dr. Morrison traced their descendants forward through 4 generations, identifying all living descendants who would have been adults in 1976. The descendant tree contained 87 individuals, Dr. Morrison wrote in her report. We needed to narrow this to candidates who were in Montana in April 1976 and had some connection to Thomas Elliott or Missoula. In Phase 3, geographic and age filtering, using census data, city directories, and public records, Dr. Morrison eliminated candidates who didn't live in Montana in 1976. This reduced the list to 23 individuals. Age analysis further narrowed the field. Based on typical homicide patterns, Dr. Morrison focused on males between ages 20 and 55 in 1976. This left 11 candidates. In Phase 4, connection to case, this was the crucial phase. Dr. Morrison reviewed the 1976 case file, looking for any mentions of the 11 candidates. On November 1, 2023, she found a match. One name appeared in the file, Robert Patrick Callahan. According to the April 1976 case file, Robert Patrick Callahan, age 38, participated in the search for Thomas Elliott on April 25, 1976. The volunteer log, maintained by Search and Rescue Coordinator Thomas Brennan, listed Callahan as volunteer number 23. He searched Grid Section C, an area northwest of where Elliott's vehicle was discovered. When I saw that name in the file, I immediately called Detective Connor, Dr. Morrison said in a December 2023 interview. A volunteer searcher whose DNA ends up in the victim's car, that's a major red flag. Robert Patrick Callahan was born on June 15, 1938, in Butte, Montana, according to his birth certificate filed with Silver Bow County. He moved to Missoula in 1965. According to Missoula city directories, he worked as a maintenance supervisor at the University of Montana from 1966 to 1998. Callahan lived at 2847 Duncan Drive in Missoula in 1976, approximately 3.2 miles from Thomas Elliott's home on Poplar Street. He was married with 3 children. On November 2, 2023, Detective Connor requested a search warrant for a DNA sample from Robert Callahan. The warrant application, filed with Missoula County District Court, detailed the genetic genealogy investigation and explained why Callahan was a suspect. District Court Judge Sarah Martinez issued the warrant on November 3, 2023. On November 6, 2023, at 8:47 a.m., Detective Connor and Detective Lisa Martinez arrived at Robert Callahan's residence at 4521 River Road in Missoula. Callahan, now 85 years old and retired, lived alone. His wife had died in 2019. According to Detective Connor's report filed on November 6, 2023, the conversation proceeded as follows. Connor identified himself and explained they were investigating the 1976 disappearance of Thomas Elliott. He showed Callahan the search warrant and requested a DNA sample via buccal swab. Mr. Callahan became visibly nervous, Connor wrote in his report. His hands shook as he read the warrant. He asked why, after 47 years, police were still investigating the case. Connor collected the DNA sample at 9:03 a.m. According to protocol, he used 2 buccal swabs, stored them in separate evidence containers, and sealed them with evidence tape. The samples were assigned evidence numbers 2023 MC8847A and 2023 MC8847B. Before we left, I asked Mr. Callahan if he remembered participating in the search for Thomas Elliott in April 1976, Connor wrote. He said he did. I asked if he had known Elliot personally. He said he did not, that he had just volunteered to help when he heard about the search. I asked if he had any contact with Elliot's vehicle during the search. He said he had not. The DNA samples were delivered to the Montana State Crime Laboratory at 11:15 a.m. on November 6, 2023. Dr. Mendez conducted comparison analysis on November 7 and 8, 2023. The process involved comparing the DNA profile from Robert Callahan's buccal swab to the DNA profile from the blood on Thomas Elliott's steering wheel. On November 8, 2023, at 3:42 p.m., Dr. Mendez called Detective Connor with the results. Perfect match. The DNA from the steering wheel blood definitively came from Robert Patrick Callahan, Dr. Mendez wrote in her official report dated November 8, 2023. The statistical probability of this DNA profile belonging to someone other than Robert Callahan is less than 1 in 8.7 trillion. According to Dr. Mendez's analysis, the blood pattern on the steering wheel suggested Callahan had grabbed the wheel with his left hand while blood was on his hand. The quantity and location of blood indicated he had been bleeding from an injury, likely to his left hand or arm. This wasn't transfer DNA from casual contact, Dr. Mendez explained. This was fresh blood from an active wound. Robert Callahan was bleeding inside Thomas Elliott's car on April 23, 1976. With DNA confirmation, Detective Connor began reconstructing the relationship between Robert Callahan and Thomas Elliott. According to Connor's investigation summary dated November 15, 2023, several key facts emerged. Employment records from Missoula Community Medical Center, obtained via subpoena, revealed that Robert Callahan's wife, Marie Callahan, worked as a nurse at the hospital from 1969 to 1987. She would have interacted regularly with the hospital pharmacy where Thomas Elliott worked. This established a connection, Connor noted. The Callahans weren't strangers to Elliott. There was professional overlap. Bank records from First Interstate Bank, obtained via court order, showed that Robert Callahan faced significant financial difficulties in 1976. In March 1976, he was 3 months behind on mortgage payments. A foreclosure notice was filed on April 8, 1976. Credit card statements showed mounting debt. In April 1976, Callahan owed $8,700 across 3 credit cards, a substantial sum in 1976. Financial desperation can be a motive for robbery, Connor wrote in his analysis. If Callahan knew Elliott was a pharmacist with access to valuable prescription drugs, he might have seen him as a target. Research into 1970s crime patterns revealed that prescription drug theft was a growing problem. Opioids, particularly Demerol and morphine, had significant street value. Pharmacists were sometimes targeted for robbery. It's possible Callahan believed Elliott had drugs or money from his pharmacy work, Connor theorized in his report. He may have confronted Elliott after work, forced him to drive to a remote location, and things went wrong. Perhaps the most chilling aspect was that Callahan volunteered for the search effort the day after Elliott disappeared. Perpetrators returning to crime scenes or inserting themselves into investigations is a well-documented phenomenon, said Dr. Robert Hayes, a forensic psychologist consulted on the case. It can be driven by a need to know what police know, to monitor the investigation, or to relive the crime. Volunteering for the search gave Callahan access to information and made him appear helpful and concerned. On November 16, 2023, Detective Connor presented his findings to Missoula County Attorney Jennifer Hayes. After reviewing the evidence, Hayes authorized murder charges against Robert Patrick Callahan. The DNA evidence is compelling, Hayes told reporters at a press conference held on November 17, 2023. Combined with the suspect's financial situation, his access to the victim through family connections, and his suspicious behavior in volunteering for the search, we have sufficient evidence to proceed with prosecution. On November 17, 2023, at 7:15 a.m., Detective Connor and 4 deputies from the Missoula County Sheriff's Office arrived at Callahan's residence on River Road. They executed an arrest warrant. Mr. Callahan appeared shocked when I informed him he was under arrest for the murder of Thomas Elliott, Connor wrote in his arrest report. He repeatedly said, "This is a mistake. I didn't kill anyone." Callahan was transported to Missoula County Detention Facility, where he was booked at 8:33 a.m. Charges filed: murder in the first degree under Montana Code, annotated Section 45-5102. Bond was set at $2 million. On November 17, 2023, at 10:00 a.m., Detective Connor visited Margaret Elliott at her home on Poplar Street, the same house she had lived in with Thomas 47 years earlier. Margaret was now 85 years old. Mrs. Elliott was remarkable, Connor told our team. After 47 years of not knowing what happened to her husband, she finally had answers. She cried, but she also smiled. She said, "I always knew someone knew what happened. I just didn't know if I'd live long enough to find out." Jennifer Elliott, now 62 and living in Seattle, received a phone call from Detective Connor at 11:30 a.m. In a December 2023 interview, she described the moment. "I was at work when my phone rang. Detective Connor introduced himself and said, 'We've made an arrest in your father's case.' I couldn't speak for a moment. 47 years, almost my entire life, not knowing. And suddenly, there was an answer. Michael Elliott, now 59 and living in Portland, Oregon, was also notified by phone. I was 7 years old when I last saw my dad," he said in an interview conducted in December 2023. "I'm 59 now, more than 50 years not knowing." Detective Connor's call changed everything. The arrest generated significant media coverage. The Missoulian published a front-page article on November 18, 2023, with the headline, "DNA Evidence Solves 47-Year-Old Murder Case. Local Man Arrested in 1976 Disappearance of Pharmacist." The article noted, Robert Callahan, 85, has been charged with murder in connection with the 1976 disappearance of Thomas Elliott. Authorities say DNA evidence from the original crime scene, analyzed using modern forensic genetic genealogy, identified Callahan as a suspect. Callahan volunteered in search operations for Elliott in April 1976. Local television stations KPIX and KISI ran extended segments on their evening news broadcasts. KPIX interviewed Dr. Patricia Mendez about forensic genetic genealogy. "This case demonstrates the power of preserving evidence," Dr. Mendez said in the broadcast. Blood samples collected in 1976 with primitive technology by 2023 standards solved a murder 47 years later. Every piece of evidence preserved is potentially solvable. The University of Montana, where Callahan had worked for 32 years, released a statement. "We are shocked by these allegations. Mr. Callahan retired from the university in 1998. We are cooperating fully with law enforcement." Community members who remembered the 1976 case expressed disbelief. "Bobby Callahan," said Frank Wilson, who lived on Duncan Drive near the Callahans in the 1970s, in a November 18, 2023 interview with the Missoulian. "He was my neighbor. Our kids played together. I would never have suspected him of something like this." Robert Callahan retained defense attorney Marcus Webb, a veteran criminal defense lawyer with 28 years of experience. Webb, speaking to reporters on November 20, 2023, outlined his strategy. "DNA evidence is powerful, but it's not the whole story," Webb said. "The prosecution will need to explain how my client's DNA got on that steering wheel. There could be innocent explanations. My client maintains his innocence. He did not kill Thomas Elliott." In an interview with our team conducted in December 2023, Webb elaborated on potential defense theories. Robert Callahan volunteered for the search. It's possible he came into contact with the vehicle during the search operations. Perhaps he looked inside the car. Perhaps blood from the victim transferred to him, and then he touched the steering wheel. The prosecution needs to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the DNA got there during the commission of a crime, not during legitimate search operations the next day. However, prosecutors pointed to several weaknesses in this defense theory. According to the search operation log from April 1976, Callahan was assigned to Grid Section C, which was approximately half a mile from where Elliott's vehicle was parked. Crime scene photographs show Elliott's vehicle was secured with police tape by 8 a.m. on April 24, 1976. Callahan arrived at the search staging area at 9:30 a.m., according to the volunteer log. The vehicle was a secured crime scene before Callahan arrived, County Attorney Jennifer Hayes noted in a response filed on November 22, 2023. There is no legitimate reason for Callahan's blood to be on that steering wheel. The blood pattern indicates fresh bleeding from an active wound, not transfer from touching a surface. On November 20, 2023, Robert Patrick Callahan appeared in Missoula County District Court for his arraignment before Judge Sarah Martinez. The courtroom at 200 West Broadway Street was filled with media, family members, and curious observers. According to court transcripts, the arraignment proceeded formally. Callahan entered the courtroom at 2 p.m., escorted by 2 deputies. He wore an orange detention facility jumpsuit. His hands were cuffed. Judge Martinez read the charge. Robert Patrick Callahan, you are charged with murder in the first degree in violation of Montana Code Annotated Section 45-5102. Specifically the murder of Thomas William Elliott on or about April 23, 1976. How do you plead? Defense attorney Marcus Webb stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. The plea was entered into the record at 2:07 p.m. County Attorney Jennifer Hayes requested that bond remain at $2 million. The defendant is charged with a 47-year-old murder, Hayes argued. He has lived freely for nearly 5 decades while the victim's family has suffered without answers. He represents a flight risk. Webb argued for reduced bond. Your Honor, my client is 85 years old. He has lived in Missoula for 58 years. He has 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren, all in Montana. He is not a flight risk. The bond should be reduced to a reasonable amount. Judge Martinez denied the motion for bond reduction. Given the severity of the charge and the length of time this case remained unsolved, I find the current bond appropriate. Mr. Callahan will remain in custody pending trial. Trial was scheduled for April 15, 2024. Between November 2023 and April 2024, both prosecution and defense filed numerous motions. Court records show 23 separate filings during this period. On December 8, 2023, Webb filed a defense motion to suppress DNA evidence. Webb argued that the genetic genealogy process violated Callahan's Fourth Amendment rights. The use of genetic genealogy databases to identify suspects without their knowledge or consent represents an unreasonable search, the motion stated. County Attorney Hayes filed a response on December 18, 2023, citing legal precedent. The Supreme Court has consistently held that individuals do not have a reasonable expectation of privacy in DNA they voluntarily share with third parties. The defendant's relatives voluntarily uploaded their DNA to public databases. Law enforcement's use of these public databases to identify suspects is constitutional. On January 12, 2024, Judge Martinez ruled against the defense motion. The use of genetic genealogy in criminal investigations has been upheld in multiple jurisdictions, Martinez wrote in her ruling. The defendant's DNA was obtained via lawful search warrant after probable cause was established through genetic genealogy. The motion to suppress is denied. On January 22, 2024, prosecutors filed a motion for admission of prior bad acts. Prosecutors filed a motion to introduce evidence of Callahan's financial difficulties in 1976. The defendant's financial desperation provides motive for robbery, the motion argued. Bank records showing unpaid debts and foreclosure proceedings are relevant to establishing why the defendant targeted Thomas Elliott. Webb filed a response on January 29, 2024, arguing this evidence was prejudicial. My client's financial situation in 1976 is irrelevant. Many people face financial difficulties without committing murder. This evidence serves only to prejudice the jury against my client. Judge Martinez partially granted the motion on February 9, 2024. The prosecution may introduce evidence of foreclosure proceedings and significant debt, as this establishes potential financial motive. However, specific amounts owed on individual credit cards may be excluded as overly prejudicial. On February 15, 2024, Webb filed a defense motion for change of venue. Webb argued that extensive media coverage made a fair trial impossible in Missoula County. Every potential juror has been exposed to prejudicial coverage of this case, the motion stated. My client cannot receive a fair trial in this jurisdiction. Hayes opposed the motion. While media coverage has been substantial, voir dire can identify and exclude biased jurors. Change of venue is not necessary. Judge Martinez denied the motion on February 28, 2024. Extensive media coverage alone does not necessitate change of venue. The court will conduct thorough voir dire to ensure an impartial jury. Jury selection began on April 15, 2024, at 9:00 a.m. Judge Martinez had summoned 85 potential jurors for voir dire, the process of questioning potential jurors to assess their suitability. According to court transcripts, voir dire lasted 3 days. Judge Martinez, County Attorney Hayes, and Defense Attorney Webb questioned potential jurors about their knowledge of the case, their views on DNA evidence, and their ability to remain impartial. Several potential jurors were dismissed for cause. Juror number 7 expressed strong belief that DNA evidence is infallible and defendants should just confess if the DNA matches. Juror number 14 was a personal friend of the Elliott family and attended Thomas Elliott's memorial service in 1977. Juror number 23 stated he doesn't trust forensic science and doesn't believe in DNA evidence. Juror number 31 worked at Missoula Community Medical Center in 1976 and knew Thomas Elliott personally. Juror number 47's wife is a genetic counselor, and he expressed concerns about understanding technical testimony better than other jurors. Both prosecution and defense used peremptory challenges, the ability to dismiss potential jurors without stating a reason. Each side had 8 peremptory challenges for a murder trial in Montana. On April 17, 2024, at 4:37 p.m., the final jury was seated, 12 jurors and 2 alternates. The jury consisted of 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from 28 to 67. None had lived in Missoula in 1976. The trial began at 9 a.m. on April 18, 2024. Judge Martinez's courtroom was filled to capacity. Margaret Elliott, now 86, sat in the front row, flanked by her children Jennifer and Michael. Television cameras, prohibited inside the courtroom, lined the hallway outside. County Attorney Jennifer Hayes delivered the prosecution's opening statement. According to trial transcripts, she spoke for 43 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about science, truth, and justice delayed, but not denied, Hayes began. On April 23, 1976, Thomas Elliott left work at 5:08 p.m. He never arrived home. His car was found the next morning with blood on the driver's seat and steering wheel. For 47 years, his family didn't know what happened. But science doesn't forget. DNA doesn't lie. Hayes outlined the prosecution's case. First, Thomas Elliott disappeared on April 23, 1976. Second, his vehicle was found with blood evidence. Third, modern DNA analysis identified Robert Callahan's blood on the steering wheel. Fourth, Callahan had financial motive and opportunity. Fifth, Callahan inserted himself into the investigation by volunteering for searches. The defendant's DNA is in the victim's car, Hayes concluded. The statistical probability of that DNA belonging to someone other than Robert Callahan is less than 1 in 8.7 trillion. That's more than the entire population of Earth. The evidence will show that Robert Callahan is responsible for Thomas Elliott's death. Defense attorney Marcus Webb spoke for 37 minutes, according to transcripts. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about incomplete information and jumping to conclusions, Webb began. Yes, my client's DNA is on that steering wheel, but DNA doesn't tell you when it got there or how it got there. DNA doesn't tell you the context. Webb argued several key points. First, no body has ever been found. Second, no witnesses placed Callahan with Elliott on April 23, 1976. Third, the DNA could have been transferred during legitimate search operations. Fourth, financial difficulties don't prove murder. Fifth, circumstantial evidence requires speculation, not proof beyond reasonable doubt. The prosecution wants you to believe that because Robert Callahan had debts in 1976, he must have murdered Thomas Elliott, Webb said. But millions of Americans had debt in 1976. That doesn't make them murderers. The prosecution cannot prove when or how that DNA got on the steering wheel. They cannot prove my client committed murder. Reasonable doubt exists, and you must acquit. The prosecution called 17 witnesses over 6 days of testimony. Dr. Patricia Mendez, forensic DNA specialist, testified on April 18 and 19, 2024. Dr. Mendez testified for 6 hours over 2 days. Using PowerPoint presentations and visual aids, she explained the DNA analysis process to the jury. I extracted DNA from blood samples collected in 1976, Dr. Mendez testified. Using STR analysis, I developed 2 DNA profiles. One matched Thomas Elliott, the other matched Robert Callahan with a probability of greater than 99.99% accuracy. On cross-examination, Webb challenged the reliability of DNA from 47-year-old samples. Dr. Mendez, can DNA degrade over time? Webb asked. Yes, DNA can degrade, Mendez answered. Can degraded DNA lead to false results? Degraded DNA can make it difficult to develop a profile, but it doesn't cause false matches. If we get a profile, it's accurate. In this case, the DNA was well preserved. Detective David Connor testified on April 19 and 20, 2024. Connor testified about the cold case investigation and genetic genealogy process. He explained how the investigation identified Callahan as a suspect. The DNA match from Codis was negative, so we used genetic genealogy, Connor testified. We identified distant relatives, built family trees, and narrowed to candidates who were in Montana in 1976. Robert Callahan's name appeared in the original case file as a search volunteer. When genetic genealogy pointed to him as a suspect, that was a major red flag. On cross-examination, Webb focused on the volunteer aspect. Detective Connor, search volunteers handle evidence, don't they? Webb asked. Sometimes, yes, but... And Mr. Callahan was a volunteer. He was trying to help find Thomas Elliott, correct? Yes, but the vehicle was a secured crime scene before he arrived. Just answer the question, Detective. He volunteered to help. Yes or no? Yes. Margaret Elliott testified on April 22, 2024. Margaret Elliott, age 86, testified about her husband's disappearance. She described April 23, 1976, and the family's 47-year search for answers. Tom was the most reliable person I ever knew, Margaret testified, her voice steady despite obvious emotion. When he didn't come home that night, I knew something terrible had happened. He would never have just left. He loved his children. He loved his work. Someone took him from us. Webb declined to cross-examine Margaret Elliott. Dr. Robert Hayes, forensic psychologist, testified on April 23, 2024. Dr. Hayes, a forensic psychologist with 30 years of experience, testified about perpetrator behavior. Perpetrators inserting themselves into investigations is a documented phenomenon, Hayes testified. It serves several purposes: monitoring the investigation, appearing helpful and concerned, satisfying psychological needs to revisit the crime. The fact that Mr. Callahan volunteered for search operations the day after Mr. Elliott's vehicle was discovered is consistent with this pattern. On cross-examination, Webb challenged this testimony. Dr. Hayes, couldn't someone volunteer for a search simply because they wanted to help? Webb asked. Certainly, that's possible, Hayes acknowledged. So volunteering doesn't prove someone committed a crime? No, but combined with other evidence, it can be significant. Former Detective James Reynolds testified on April 23, 2024. Reynolds, now 84, testified about the original 1976 investigation. He described the crime scene, the blood evidence collection, and the exhaustive investigation that yielded no suspects. I worked that case as hard as I could, Reynolds testified. I interviewed 127 people. I followed every lead. But in 1976, we didn't have DNA analysis. I always believed that case could be solved if the right technology came along. I'm glad I lived long enough to see it. The defense called 6 witnesses over 2 days. Dr. Martin Fletcher, DNA expert, testified on April 24, 2024. The defense called their own DNA expert to challenge the prosecution's conclusions. Dr. Fletcher, a forensic scientist from Seattle, testified about DNA transfer. DNA can be transferred through secondary contact, Fletcher testified. If Mr. Callahan touched a surface that had blood on it, then touched the steering wheel, DNA could transfer. This doesn't prove he was bleeding in the car. On cross-examination, County Attorney Hayes countered this testimony. Dr. Fletcher, the blood pattern analysis shows fresh blood from an active wound, Hayes said. Dr. Mendez testified that the quantity and pattern are inconsistent with secondary transfer. Do you disagree with that analysis? I'm not a blood pattern analyst, Fletcher admitted. So you can't challenge Dr. Mendez's conclusion that this was fresh blood from an active wound. Not based on my expertise, no. Robert Callahan testified on April 25, 2024. Against his attorney's advice, Callahan chose to testify. His testimony lasted 3 hours. I did not kill Thomas Elliott, Callahan testified. I didn't know him. I volunteered for the search because I wanted to help. I don't know how my DNA got on his steering wheel, but I didn't harm him. On cross-examination, Hayes pressed Callahan on inconsistencies. Mr. Callahan, you testified you didn't know Thomas Elliott, but your wife worked at the same hospital where Elliott was the head pharmacist for 11 years. You never met him? I may have met him briefly at hospital events. I didn't know him well. You were facing foreclosure in April 1976, correct? I was having financial difficulties, yes. You were 3 months behind on mortgage payments? Yes. You owed $8,700 in credit card debt? Yes. Were you desperate for money in April 1976? I was concerned about my finances, but I wasn't desperate enough to kill someone. Your blood is on Thomas Elliott's steering wheel. How did it get there? I don't know. You don't know. Mr. Callahan, the the statistical probability of that DNA belonging to someone other than you is less than 1 in 8.7 trillion. Do you dispute that? I can't dispute the science. I just know I didn't kill him. Closing arguments took place on April 26, 2024. County Attorney Hayes spoke for 52 minutes. The defense wants you to believe this is a mystery, Hayes told the jury. But it's not a mystery. The evidence is clear. Robert Callahan's blood is on Thomas Elliott's steering wheel, not transferred DNA. Fresh blood from an active wound. The defendant was bleeding inside the victim's car on April 23, 1976. The defense says there's reasonable doubt about when and how the DNA got there, but the vehicle was a secured crime scene before Callahan arrived at the search area. There is no innocent explanation for his blood being there. The defendant had motive. He was facing foreclosure. He owed thousands in debt. He knew Elliott was a pharmacist through his wife's work at the hospital. He may have believed Elliott had drugs or money. The defendant had opportunity. Elliott disappeared between 5:15 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. on April 23rd. His vehicle was found in a remote area. The defendant lived 3 miles from Elliott's home. And most damningly, the defendant inserted himself into the investigation by volunteering for searches. This is classic perpetrator behavior. Ladies and gentlemen, 47 years ago, Robert Callahan took Thomas Elliott's life. The science proves it. The evidence proves it. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Find the defendant guilty. Defense Attorney Webb spoke for 47 minutes. The prosecution wants you to believe their story, Webb told the jury. But their story is built on assumptions, not facts. They assume Mr. Callahan had motive because he had debt. Millions of people have debt. That doesn't make them murderers. They assume his DNA got on the steering wheel during a crime, but they can't prove that. DNA doesn't have a timestamp. Dr. Fletcher testified DNA can transfer through secondary contact. Maybe Mr. Callahan touched something at the search site, then touched the steering wheel. The prosecution can't prove otherwise. The prosecution talks about classic perpetrator behavior, but hundreds of people volunteer for search and rescue operations every year. Are they all suspects? Of course not. Here's what the prosecution hasn't proven. They haven't proven when Elliott died. No body has been found. They haven't proven how he died. They haven't proven Mr. Callahan was with Elliott on April 23rd. Not one witness, not one piece of evidence places them together. The prosecution's case is circumstantial. It requires you to speculate, to assume, to guess. That's not proof beyond reasonable doubt. That's reasonable doubt itself. My client is 85 years old. He has lived in this community for 58 years. He raised a family here. He worked honestly for 32 years. One DNA sample from 47 years ago, with no context, no witnesses, no body, is not enough to convict him of murder. Ladies and gentlemen, reasonable doubt exists. You must acquit. The jury began deliberations at 3:47 p.m. on April 26, 2024. They deliberated for 11 hours over 2 days. On April 27, 2024, at 2:34 p.m., the jury informed the bailiff they had reached a verdict. Judge Martinez reconvened court at 3:00 p.m. The courtroom was silent as jury foreperson Lisa McDonald stood. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Martinez asked. We have, Your Honor, McDonald replied. What is your verdict? We find the defendant, Robert Patrick Callahan, guilty of murder in the first degree. Margaret Elliott closed her eyes. Her children embraced her. Robert Callahan showed no visible reaction. Judge Martinez polled the jury individually. All 12 confirmed their guilty verdict. Mr. Callahan, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers, Judge Martinez said. I will schedule sentencing for June 14, 2024. Until then, you will remain in custody. This court is adjourned. Robert Callahan appeared before Judge Martinez for sentencing on June 14, 2024. Montana law mandates specific sentences for first-degree murder. Judge Martinez had limited discretion. Before sentencing, the court heard victim impact statements from the Elliott family. Jennifer Elliott spoke first. "I was 15 years old when my father disappeared," she said, reading from prepared remarks. "I'm 63 now. I've lived most of my life without him. I graduated high school, college, got married, had children, all without my father. Robert Callahan took that from me. He took it from my brother, my mother, from everyone who loved my dad. And then he volunteered to search for him, pretending to help while knowing exactly what he'd done. That cruelty is unforgivable." Michael Elliott spoke next. "I barely remember my father," he said. "I was 11 when he vanished. I have maybe a dozen clear memories of him, teaching me to fish, helping with homework, playing catch in the backyard. That's all I have. Robert Callahan made sure I would never have more. He stole 47 years from my mother, who waited every day for answers. I hope he spends the rest of his life thinking about what he took from us." Margaret Elliott, too frail to stand, remained seated and spoke briefly. "Tom was a good man who helped people every day. He deserved to live. He deserved to see his children grow up. Robert Callahan took that away. I don't hate him. I pity him. But justice needed to be done. Today, it has been." Marcus Webb spoke on Callahan's behalf. "Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence. He believes the verdict was wrong. However, he acknowledges the jury has spoken. He is 85 years old. Any significant prison sentence is effectively a life sentence. We ask the court to consider his age and lack of prior criminal history." County Attorney Jennifer Hayes recommended the maximum sentence. The defendant committed premeditated murder in 1976 and evaded justice for 47 years. He showed no remorse. He inserted himself into the investigation, pretending to help search for the victim he had killed. His age does not mitigate his crime. The court should impose the maximum sentence. Judge Martinez spoke for 7 minutes before imposing sentence. According to court transcripts, "Mr. Callahan, a jury of your peers has found you guilty of murdering Thomas Elliott. The evidence against you was compelling. Your blood was found in the victim's vehicle under circumstances that have no innocent explanation. You have shown no remorse and maintained your innocence despite overwhelming evidence. Murder in the first degree in Montana carries a mandatory sentence. I sentence you to life in prison without possibility of parole. I further recommend you serve your sentence at Montana State Prison in Deer Lodge. You are remanded to the custody of the Montana Department of Corrections immediately." Robert Patrick Callahan was escorted from the courtroom at 11:47 a.m. He did not look at the Elliott family. In interviews conducted in July 2024, the Elliott family reflected on the resolution of the case. "For 47 years, we didn't know what happened," Margaret Elliott said. "We imagined every scenario. Maybe he had amnesia. Maybe he started a new life somewhere. Maybe he was still alive. That not knowing was torture. Now we know. It doesn't bring Tom back, but it gives us peace." Jennifer Elliott has become an advocate for cold case investigations and DNA technology. "Cases like my father's show why evidence preservation matters," she said. "Those blood samples collected in 1976 solved a murder in 2023. Every cold case with biological evidence should be reviewed with modern technology." Michael Elliott expressed mixed emotions. "I'm grateful for Detective Connor and everyone who worked to solve this case," he said. "But I'm also angry. Angry that it took 47 years. Angry that Robert Callahan lived freely while we suffered. But at least now we have justice." The Elliott case has influenced law enforcement practices in Montana and beyond. According to the Montana Department of Justice, cold case units across the state have begun systematic review of unsolved cases with biological evidence. The Elliott case is a blueprint, said Montana Attorney General Austin Knudsen in a statement released in July 2024. It shows that cases we thought were unsolvable can be solved. We're prioritizing forensic genetic genealogy in cold case investigations statewide. The Missoula County Sheriff's Office has identified 23 additional cold cases from 1970 to 2000 with preserved biological evidence. According to Sheriff Eddie Anderson, these cases are being evaluated for genetic genealogy analysis. We owe it to every victim and every family to pursue justice, no matter how much time has passed, Sheriff Anderson said in an August 2024 interview. The Elliott case has also reignited debate about privacy and genetic genealogy. Civil liberties organizations have expressed concerns about law enforcement use of DNA databases. While we support solving violent crimes, we're concerned about the privacy implications of genetic genealogy, said Montana ACLU Executive Director Akilah Lane in a statement released in July 2024. People who voluntarily upload DNA to genealogy sites may not realize their genetic information could be used to investigate their relatives. Dr. Ellen Morrison, the genetic genealogist who identified Callahan, defended the practice. Genetic genealogy is used only for serious violent crimes, murder, rape, kidnapping, she said. It's a targeted tool, not mass surveillance, and it works. It brings justice to families who have waited decades for answers. The Montana legislature is considering legislation to regulate law enforcement use of genetic genealogy. According to State Senator Sarah Hoffman, who is sponsoring the legislation, the goal is to balance public safety with privacy concerns. We want law enforcement to solve cold cases, but we need guardrails, Hoffman said in a September 2024 interview. Our legislation would require judicial oversight and limit genetic genealogy to serious violent felonies. On August 12, 2024, the Elliott family held a memorial service for Thomas Elliott at St. Francis Xavier Church in Missoula, the same church where they had held a prayer vigil in 1976. More than 150 people attended. Former colleagues from Missoula Community Medical Center spoke about Elliott's dedication to patient care. Former pharmacy students he mentored shared stories of his generosity and teaching. The family announced establishment of the Thomas Elliott Memorial Scholarship at the University of Montana School of Pharmacy. The scholarship will support students pursuing careers in community pharmacy. Dad believed pharmacy was about serving people, Jennifer Elliott said during the memorial service. This scholarship continues that mission. It's a way to honor his memory and his values. Margaret Elliott, who had waited 47 years for justice, spoke briefly. Tom was taken from us violently and suddenly, she said. But his kindness, his integrity, and his commitment to helping others, those things can never be taken. They live on in everyone he touched. The case file for number 76 to 1847 was officially closed on August 15, 2024, exactly 48 years after it went cold. Detective David Connor filed the final report. This case represents the triumph of science, persistence, and the pursuit of justice, Connor wrote. Technology that didn't exist in 1976 solved a murder that seemed unsolvable. It brought closure to a family that never stopped hoping. It proved that time doesn't erase accountability. Robert Patrick Callahan, age 86, is serving his life sentence at Montana State Prison in Deer Lodge. According to Montana Department of Corrections records, he continues to maintain his innocence. Thomas William Elliott's name is inscribed on a memorial plaque in the lobby of Missoula Community Medical Center. Alongside this inscription, dedicated pharmacist, beloved husband and father. His service to this community will never be forgotten. 1935 to 1976. The case of Thomas Elliott demonstrates that justice, though sometimes delayed for decades, can still be achieved. DNA doesn't forget, science doesn't forget, and families never stop seeking answers. Case closed. August 15th, 2024. 47 years, 17,155 days. Justice served.